this series, we will be discussing practical approaches to different elements of teacher recruitment in the midst of the global teacher supply crisis.
And we've both been in education for 36 years. Mark, you've been a head teacher, first of all, for 22 years in total. First of all, 14 years in the UK independent sector, then 8 years in the international sector as a head teacher, principal and CEO, both in the Middle East and also Southeast Asia. I've been a school leader since 1997, first in the state sector in the UK, and I've spent the last 13 years as principal of British School Muscat, and since 2019 I've also been responsible for British School Salalah.
Okay, Kai, so let's get into discussing this. Can you set the scene?
Let's set the scene. Well, it seems since I've been in the international sector, I've attended conferences, COBIS, BSME. I know you've also attended Bobasia in recent years, and we usually get a sort of 20-minute, half-hour presentation from ISC Research. And there's been a consistent message in those presentations that a global teacher recruitment crisis is coming. And it seems like, I think from a lot of us now in schools, and we did a LinkedIn survey, didn't we, for the BSME conference about this, about is recruitment worse this year than ever before? And I think at least 70% of respondents said this year it's worse than ever. And so it seems like what you might call in the corporate world a grey rhino that's out there in the distance waiting to charge is finally charging towards us. And so this year in my own school, we've actually had to phase out German because we just can't recruit German teachers in the numbers that we need. And we're also struggling with PE, and we have tried recruiting for a physics teacher and pretty much got zero response. So whether I'm talking about my own schools here in Oman or talking to other colleagues in the Middle East or around the world, it seems to be that we are experiencing now this rhino in a sort of head-on challenge right in our faces. Is that your experience, Mark?
Absolutely, and I think the situation's getting worse and set to get worse because of the changes in wider working patterns post-COVID. I mean, a lot more people working from home, a lot more flexible working being standardized within society. And as schools, we can't offer that very well at the moment. So, you know, we're expecting teachers to be in school 8:30 to 4:30 or whatever, and 5 days a week. And that's very different from wider society. So I think it's going to be increasingly difficult to attract people into the profession.
And in quite a lot of respects, it's been pretty tough for a while, hasn't it? So I don't know what you were doing maybe in Dubai or in Hong Kong in terms of trying maybe non-traditional methods of attracting candidates to your school. What sort of innovative or slightly different approaches have you been taking in the last 8 years since you've been in the international sector?
Well, I think increasingly we've put as much effort into recruiting teachers as we have into recruiting students, and I think that's definitely going to be the way forward. It's significantly more difficult to do that, and I think part of that is about developing an employer brand. So we've gone beyond, you know, the traditional TES advert to, you know, harnessing social media, building up a presence on LinkedIn, you know, building up a presence on Twitter a few years ago, but less so these days. And then increasingly, you know, putting stuff out on Instagram. So you create this employer brand. And is that something you're doing as well, Kai?
It is indeed. I mean, we've had a full-time communications manager since about 2013. In the last 18 months, we've doubled the size of our team. So we've gone from 1 communications manager to 2 full-time people who are working on like the brand, the marketing of the school. That's something which was, you know, the first 20 odd years of my career in education, I wouldn't have come across at all. And certainly in the international sector, and I guess maybe that's increasingly common in the independent sector in the UK, that schools have dedicated people who are in marketing teams. Would you say that's a common?
Absolutely, and increasingly they're being sort of moved slightly across from student recruitment and, you know, harnessed into this area of teacher recruitment as well. And, you know, I think that's a transition that I think marketing departments just need to go through.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we found initially that we were using photos, we were writing stories, and then more recently we've been investing quite heavily in creating video content. We've also done some podcasts about details of the school, both for prospective parents but also for prospective staff. And quite a lot of feedback from prospective staff is that they really find the video content really useful, and they also find the podcasts really useful as different ways of accessing information about the school. So we now have 2 full-time people invested in market the school, and about half their time is, like you say, is about attracting students, but a good half of their time is also about building the brand, so we're attracting quality staff to the school. Any other particular innovative approaches or different approaches that you've been exploring?
Well, I think it is about, you know, creating an environment where people want to work at your school. And I think that's about, you know, you've got to have the basics in place. You've got to look after your staff, because at the end of the day, they are the most important advocate for you. Staff, you know, word of mouth is really important. And so it is about having really good onboarding procedures. It's about having really competitive packages and salaries. And it's about also about actually looking after people when they move on. And one of the ways we've sort of brought all that together is, you know, to build designated areas on websites, which have got, as you say, you know, video content and case studies from teachers. So people, when they're applying for a job, can see a teacher whom they can identify with, in order to say, well, actually, that's what it's like for me to be at that school. You know, I can picture what it's like. And I think those non-traditional methods are really important.
Yeah, and I think if you speak to marketeers, professional marketeers, they'll tell you that, you know, you can invest a lot in you know, commercial marketing, in videos, in websites, in all those stories, which is really important. But at the end of the day, very often the most powerful form of marketing is word of mouth. And as you've said there, making sure that you're investing and working with your colleagues in a way that they are the greatest advocates for the school. What I've also found interesting is when we've been speaking to potential candidates, that actually our students in the international sector, as they move from one school to another around the international sector, they can also be great advocates for your school. Because I remember a teacher who's at our school now, and I was interviewing him a couple of years ago for the position at school. And he said, I've seen all this stuff on social media. I've seen your videos and I've seen everything that you're putting out there. And he says, and I know it's genuinely true. I know it's authentic, because I've had a number of students who've come to my school from your school, and they've told me exactly the same stories that I'm seeing that you're marketing. So that's really interesting, isn't it? That whether we're talking about staff, whether we're talking about our students or our parents, they are great advocates for our schools. So I think investing in those relationships right across our community is really important. And I guess a further thing I'd add is, I think sometimes recruiters can get a bit of a bad press out there, because they can charge quite significant fees for their services. I think what we've also found is nurturing relationships with a number of recruiters for both leadership and teacher positions, so they can be advocates for your school. I think that's a really important dimension as well. Is that something you've got much experience of, Mark?
Well, I mean, I've been fortunate enough to work in schools that haven't needed to use recruitment agencies to attract a good field. But I think that's partly because we did so much in other areas. But I think certainly, you know, building relationships is what it's all about. And, you know, we are going to see increasing numbers of people, you know, dependency on teacher recruitment agencies in order to fill posts. And I think it's particularly challenging if you're working in a context that people can't picture. I mean, running a school in Dubai and Hong Kong was relatively straightforward, but I know a colleague who was running a school in Almaty, you know, in Kazakhstan, you know, always found it quite difficult to sort of say, well, what's it like to live? Why would I come and work there? So I think they put a lot of work into saying, this is what it's like to live in Kazakhstan. This is what it's like to live in Almaty, and produced a fantastic video, which showed what supermarket looked like. So because people are sort of have visions of what it's, I'm not going to be able to eat normal food or Western food. Anyway, just final thoughts, Kai. What do you think around this? Where's this going, and what should schools be doing?
Well, I think if we talk about attracting people to your school, it seems like there's two major things that we just need to be continually investing in. And one is how we communicate what our school's about in a sort of formal sense on social media, on websites, and you're putting the name of the school out there. And it's also really important that we're investing in the relationships across our transient stakeholder community, our staff, our parents, our students, because they are also great ambassadors for the school. And it seems perhaps the most powerful marketing, a bit like those students were saying to that teacher, is when potential candidates for our school, they see the messages on social media, and they hear the same messages from staff who have worked with us, or parents who've sent their children to our school, or students who've been at our school. So having both those dimensions are probably the most powerful vehicles for attracting candidates to our schools.
So on that note of ending, be authentic, be and get the message out there, but be authentic about it. I think that's a great note to leave that podcast. Thanks, Kai, for all your thoughts on that. It's been really good to have a chat with you.
Thank you, Mark. It's been a joy having this conversation in what is such a crucial situation for our schools, because as we all know in education, the quality of education in our schools cannot exceed the quality of our teaching staff.
Listening to this School Management Plus podcast in association with Steed Education and KaiPod.